Thanks indeed, Rosie. 7 minutes, almost past 3 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon. You're watching GB News, The Briefing, with me, Darren McCaffrey, on TV, online, and listening potentially on your DAB digital radio. We're going to focus today on PMQs because it focused heavily on the government's response to the rise in energy costs, with the Prime Minister facing criticism from the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. It comes as it approaches 2 weeks, of course, since Russian forces moved into Ukraine, with the latest worrying news that radioactive substances could be released from Chernobyl due to a power failure. Well, let's talk about all of this and much more with the Conservative MP for Weston-super-Mare, that's John Penrose. John, thank you so much indeed for joining us. First of all, you asked a question in a Prime Minister's Question Time today. I'm not entirely sure you got a very clear answer. Just tell us what you want. You want this idea about the kind of the visas that have already been handed out, the kind of golden visas to wealthy Russians, that they should be rescinded.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an old scheme which they stopped doing now, but there was a scheme for quite a few years where if you were someone who was willing to invest a lot of money in the UK, it wasn't just Russians, it was people from right the way around the world. If you were willing to invest in British businesses, create jobs here, then you got what was colloquially known as a golden visa. And actually, the idea behind it's not necessarily a stupid one, but what we now need to know is, were any of those visas issued to people who now turn out to be Russian oligarchs, part of Putin's crony set, if I can put it that way? And if they are, and we then put them on the sanctions list, it seems a bit bonkers to leave them with a golden visa to enter the UK or to stay in the UK, because many of them may very well already be living here in posh London flats, in Mayfair and places like that. It seems a bit bonkers to let them stay. So I was really asking the PM, look, if they are on the sanctions list, will you rescind their visas and throw them out?
But you didn't. What reply did you get? It didn't sound like you were going to get that firm commitment.
I thought it was a bit better than you're describing. He basically said we will basically get rid of them one way or another if they are on the sanctions list. So I took that as pretty positive news. We'll have to wait and see once the list starts to grow, which I think it's going to quite soon, once the emergency legislation, which Parliament's been looking at this week, goes through. And we'll have to see. The proof of the pudding will be in the eating, I suppose, is the point. But I was reasonably positive about it. He seemed to be saying that they will, although he was a bit vague as to the details. But I suppose we'll allow him a bit of vagueness on that at this stage.
It is PMQs after all, I suppose. Vagueness being the purpose in many regards. John, let's move on to the situation with Ukrainian refugees. We heard from right across the House, not just from the Lib Dems, SNP, Labour, but also some Conservative MPs too, notably the former Northern Ireland Secretary Julian Smith, asking for the government to have a more humane policy when it comes to Ukrainian refugees. They do seem to have mucked this all up. Is this simply down to bureaucracy, or have they misjudged the public mood when it comes to how welcoming the British people might be to Ukrainian refugees?
I think you're right. The public, and indeed I think government ministers, want to be extremely humane about this. And in fact, what they've announced with schemes which should allow hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians into the country in a variety of different channels and ways is very, very well-intentioned and very humane. I think it sounds like it's more of a problem with actually executing the plan. So the plan's good, but a theoretical plan won't get anybody over a border. You've actually got to make it work in practice on the ground when someone presents themselves at an airport or wherever it says, I want to come to the UK. And I think it's a practical problem where we need to just implement the plans, because if they're just on paper, it won't do anybody any good.
Does this put pressure on the Home Secretary? I mean, she's clearly failing, whatever you think about it, to deal with the migrant situation in the Channel. She's not done terribly well with this. She's lost the head of the Metropolitan Police in recent weeks. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's a steady ship, the Home Office, at the moment.
Well, I think to be fair, the head of the Metropolitan Police was pushed out by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, rather than by the Home Secretary. But nonetheless, I mean, you are right to say that there is widespread concern, all the way across the political spectrum, from left to right and back again, to say we've got these plans in place. We've actually now got to deliver them. We've got to do better than this. And I think, to be fair, there is no shortage of willingness and understanding of that on the government benches. I mean, you heard Prime Minister just in the clip you showed, saying that he and a whole number of other very senior cabinet ministers are descended from immigrants themselves, so that they get it. And it's just a question of getting the thing to happen properly and soon.
OK, let's move on to energy supplies and the cost of living crisis. That was the other big issue that dominated PMQs. Let's just have a look back at what was said between the Labour leader and the Prime Minister.
Speaker, the typical energy bill is going up by £700 next month, and that's because of pressures before Russia invaded Ukraine. The Chancellor's solution? A forced £200 loan for every household, paid back in mandatory instalments over 5 years. The big gamble behind that policy was that energy costs would drop quickly after a short spike. That bet now looks certain to fail. When will the Prime Minister force the Chancellor into a U-turn?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend the Chancellor has set out plans to help families with energy costs, with unprecedented measures to abate council tax by £150, Mr. Speaker, in addition to all the other schemes that we are putting forward. And I can tell the House that, yes, he's absolutely right that we need to meet the long-term impacts of the spike in energy prices, and that's why I will be setting out an energy independence plan for this country, Mr. Speaker, in the course of the next few days to ensure that we undo some of the damage of previous decisions taken, not least by the Labour government, to invest in not to invest in nuclear, Mr. Speaker, and so that we prepare our people for the long term with sustainable, cost-efficient energy supply.
That was Prime Minister's question time a little earlier. John, when you look at the reality of all of this, petrol, diesel, maybe going to reach £2 a litre at the pumps, energy bills going up by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Next month, people's taxes going up by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. This is not sustainable. £350 is simply not going to be enough. Something's going to have to give, isn't it?
Well, I think you're right that it's clearly something which is it's already painful for an awful lot of us, and it's going to get more painful. So you're absolutely right to say that it just won't be enough. It won't be good enough for any government anywhere to sort of sit there and do nothing. The thing which I found most important about today's Prime Minister's question was the comment which the Prime Minister made right at the end of the clip that you just played, and which is his point about self-sufficiency plan. Because ultimately, what's going on here is that, for example, China is trying to wean itself off coal and is starting to import an awful lot more gas from places like Russia, incidentally. That's pushing the price up. Ukrainian crisis on top of that. So this isn't something which is going to be sort of permanently better quickly. It might spike up and down, but it's not something which is going to sort of be a sort of purely temporary thing. And that means we've got to have a long-term answer, which basically says we're surrounded by windy seas that will provide us with clean, green energy. We can do all sorts of things to wean ourselves off the influence of Russian gas, even if we're not using very much of it ourselves, and cut the costs. And ultimately, that's what we've got to do, not just for motorists and for households, but for businesses too. I mean, it drives up the costs of all our exports.
John, I get that point, but the whole point, that is much more of a medium to long-term answer, isn't it? Like, people need help. Now, I noticed in Ireland today, for example, the Cabinet agreed to cut fuel duty on petrol and diesel essentially by 15 and 20 pence respectively until the end of August. That's an immediate thing that's going to happen from midnight tonight. The petrol and diesel is going to get cheaper, quite substantially, at the pumps. The British government's going to have to act quickly in the next couple of weeks to do something, aren't they?
Well, I think we've got to be a bit careful, because what that does, I mean, the Irish example, what is it life cheaper overall? What it does is shift the cost from your energy bill to your tax bill. You're still paying, in many cases, just as much as you were before. It's just out of a different pocket. The thing that we need to do is to be clear and honest with ourselves that that's what some of these schemes are posing. Is not actually solving the problem, it's just moving things around on the table. And therefore, we've got to longer term solutions. And otherwise we're just chasing things around in circles.
OK, John, appreciate your time. A little bit of a dodgy connection, never problem. We got every word of it, though. John Penrose there joining us live from Westminster. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's stay in Parliament. Speak to